Shining Force wouldn't get a proper sequel entry right away. Well, kind of. The Sega Game Gear would receive a title called Shining Force Gaiden. For those who don't know, Gaiden means side story in Japanese. The irony is that Shining Force Gaiden was actually a direct sequel to the original Shining Force, where the actual Shining Force 2 could be treated as an independent work. That is correct. The story opens with... Well, that's just some straight up Japanese. Yep, it turns out that Shining Force Gaiden had never received an official localization at any point during its lifespan. And surprisingly, there aren't any translation patches. It's kind of easy to take for granted that these things don't just suddenly exist. So I decided to make the rather bold choice of playing the game anyway. As someone with next to zero Japanese literacy comprehension, this sounds like a potential recipe for disaster. Now, I will admit that I don't recommend playing the game this way, but this is actually a fairly comfortable experience. The 4-square menu system uses English abbreviations. Even then, I've played enough Shining games I could probably figure it out anyway. However, I will say that trying to buy better equipment was a hassle and a half, which you are required to do since everyone loses their weapons after their ship crashes. Also, a character comes in with a weapon the hero needs to equip in order to damage the final boss. That was a pants pooper at first. But otherwise, this is a pretty friendly RPG for non-Japanese speakers. Contrary to what really gives the Shining Force series its own identity amongst other SRPGs, there aren't any explorable overworld segments in Gaiden. There are still towns in the form of this point-and-click deal, a la Shining in the Darkness. While it's an undeniable shame the exploration is gone, I'm actually glad it isn't here. Aside from perhaps stuffing a Game Gear cartridge with more content than it might have been able to handle, this game runs pretty dang slow. Not to the point where the whole thing is unforgivable, but I don't think I could stand this in non-menu based gameplay scenarios. And speaking from a more selfish viewpoint, I'm not sure it would have been possible for me to finish this game if I actually had to pay attention to dialogue and directions, at least not without the help of a step-by-step guide. So with no towns to speak of, the rest of the game is composed of story here and there and battles for the rest of it. Frankly, there's not a whole lot to really discuss, but that's also really applaudable if you ask me. This is basically just Shining Force in a portable form. You attack, you cast spells, you get to see some cool animations. There's nothing from the strategy portion that's been compromised just because it was on weaker hardware. But my favorite change comes in regards to experience distribution. When a character levels up, they carry over any remaining experience towards their next level. For example, if a character has 98 experience points and receives 30 points for defeating an enemy, they will level up and now have 28 experience points. In Shining Force 1, it always reset back to 0, which wasn't ideal. Although what's ironic is that this improvement, in addition to another small change, kind of breaks the balance of the game. Even if your characters are over-leveled in comparison to the enemy they're fighting, they still get a rather high amount of experience. Because characters can potentially level up so quickly, their stats will likely snowball with relative ease. In fact, it's because of this reason that Shining Force Gaiden might just be the easiest game in the series. It takes until Chapter 3 when the game starts to get kind of tough, but only does so in a way that's annoying and not necessarily challenging. In Chapter 4, enemies would rarely do more than 1 point of physical damage to my strongest characters. And I didn't purposely grind out battles to get stronger, this game just gives you what you need. Overall, Shining Force Gaiden was a neat experience. I can't recommend in earnest that you play it, or at least not this version of it, but you may in fact be surprised by what is here. Well, I know the show is called Swift Strategy, but that was incredibly short. So how about I give you a 2-for-1 deal? As we addressed, Shining Force Gaiden did not receive an official localization, but the same was not true for Gaiden II. It actually came out over here with the subtitle Sword of Hajya. So you may be wondering why on earth this game is still in Japanese. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a case of Chris Fields being an absolute idiot and not doing his proper research. Truly, a content creator that you can trust. Either way, it wasn't a huge deal. If Gaiden 1 was a friendly non-Japanese RPG, Gaiden 2 is even more inclusive. The thing I had the most trouble with in the last game, the shop menus, actually provide indication for which party member can equip what weapons you can purchase. They even ask if you want to equip the weapon immediately. Talk about convenience. And that's pretty much it. If you thought I didn't have much to say about Gaiden, then hoo boy, I have even less to say about Gaiden 2. I still can't read the story, admittedly my fault, so I only have the gameplay to go off of. And from a mechanical standpoint, this is just Gaiden but with different maps. Although I suppose I should touch on the map design while I'm at it. Despite the fact that the maps are smaller and more simple in the Gaiden games, I will say they easily have better map design than Shining Force 1. Thankfully they learned their lesson not to just cover the whole map in deserts or forest. It feels like your characters can actually move around. Well, for the most part. Sometimes they slip back into old habits, but at least they give you a flying unit by the time they happen. And the way they use space and enemy placement feels a lot more thought out in this game. Gaiden 2 is a lot more willing to throw you in more unique and interesting scenarios, even having your party split up into separate teams during Chapter 3. But Gaiden 1 also had some cool ideas. The map where a machine restricts all magic use was a really cool concept. The only thing that truly holds the map design back is the limitations of the Game Gear itself. This is a minor issue, but the screen size is so small that you can't see a whole lot of the map as you play, meaning you have to back out of individual units to get a broader scope. It can be a bit difficult to judge distance because of this, so be careful of archers. Not to mention these windows at the top are fixed to those positions, so they make it difficult to tell what is above you. The other problem is due to the Game Gear's processor. I already alluded to this fact earlier, but the game is rather slow. Even if a map doesn't really take all that long to complete, they certainly feel extended because of the crawling pace. But if you were to ask me which one I liked more between Gaiden 1 and 2, I would say that honor goes to Gaiden 1. There are two reasons as to why I say so. For one, while Gaiden 2 is an improvement over the first, it isn't substantially better to the point it eclipses it. They both have the same level of playability. The second being the final map of Gaiden 2 is an absolute load of ass buckets. A boss with almost 300 hit points, my units can barely damage it, there's an infinitely respawning enemies with about 150 health each, the priest just healed the final boss for 100 HP. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't actually finish this game. I gave up here because I don't consider it worth my time to put in the effort to bother. While that's regrettable, I think I've played enough to pass judgment. So let's start wrapping up my thoughts on the Gaiden games as a whole. Overall, these games are rather enjoyable experiences, but I can't help but feel a little mixed. I'm grateful that these games brought so many improvements to the series. In fact, as strategy games, they are more thought out and compelling than Shining Force 1. The battles are better designed and provide more interesting challenges, all without sacrificing the core elements of the Genesis Classic, which I think is worthy of praise considering these games were on weaker hardware. But there are times when Gaiden 1 can drag as it didn't always learn the right lessons from Shining Force 1. Gaiden 2 is overall much better, but also unremarkable on its own, and that final battle seriously left a poor taste in my mouth. Enough for me to definitively call it my least favorite Shining Force game. And maybe the fact that these are Game Gear games isn't helping matters either. In fact, had these games received some kind of remake, then I would probably have enjoyed my time with them a little more. So before we wrap things up completely, how about we talk about one last game? Remember when I said that Shining Force Gaiden never received an official localization? Yeah, I lied. Shining Force CD is a full remake of the first two Gaiden games for the Sega CD. While the remake is faithful from a design perspective, I think that's totally acceptable since the Game Gear games played just fine. It was just the limitations of the hardware that made it a bit of a drag. Obviously, such shackles are now removed. Although I hope you'll forgive me, I decided not to play through all of Shining Force CD for myself. Maybe one day in the future, but I've got other things to do, and I'd rather come back to this when I'm more refreshed and had some time away from Gaiden. Because despite the upgrades, I honestly can't say they're necessarily a better experience. Due to being on a CD format, this allowed for plenty of space for CD quality music. But this also comes with the side effect that this game has to take the time to load in those assets. It's never terrible, but there is a couple of seconds of empty space between. Take a listen. The battles are almost over by the time the music is ready to play. That being said, if you are interested in experiencing Shining Force Gaiden and Gaiden 2, it's probably in your best interest to experience them through Shining Force CD. Aside from the visual and processing upgrades, the game does feature 2 new scenarios to expand upon the story. This added content actually brings in members from both Gaiden games, keeping all their stats and everything. It sounds like an early version of what Shining Force 3 would end up doing, and I think that's pretty cool. But that's it for real. So next time Shining Force is talked about on this channel, it'll actually be for the critically acclaimed Shining Force 2 on Sega Genesis. Hope to see you then.